Hours before the most important party of the year, my daughter-in-law destroyed my dress. She cut it into ribbons with a pair of scissors, looking me dead in the eye, smiling with pure cruelty. "You don't have the money to get into this party, and you weren't really invited," she told me as the fragments of fabric fell to the floor like wilted petals. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew in that moment, was that the mansion where the event was being held had always been mine. Every wall, every garden, every inch of Italian marble had belonged to me for 40 years. And when the estate manager announced in front of all the guests, "The true owner of this mansion has just arrived," I watched the color drain from my son and daughter-in-law's faces until they were as white as sheets. My son screamed, with a voice I had never heard him use, "This mansion is hers. It always was." And I, with the calm of someone who can finally breathe after years of holding back the truth, simply nodded. "Yes, it always was. Let me take you back 2 years, to when all of this began, when my husband died, leaving me a fortune that very few knew about. My husband, God rest his soul, was a discreet, intelligent, visionary man. He built a real estate empire from scratch with his own 2 hands and his brilliant mind. He never bragged, he never showed off. And I learned that precious lesson from him. True power does not need to be advertised. When he passed, he left me 3 major properties, investments overseas, bank accounts totaling millions of dollars, and that mansion, that beautiful colonial-style estate, with its white columns, enormous bay windows, and gardens that looked like they belonged in a European fairy tale. That mansion was where the city's most exclusive parties were held, where high society gathered for charity galas, for celebrations, to show off to one another. That mansion was the heart of everything, and it was mine. But I made a decision that many would call strange, perhaps even foolish. I decided to live simply, humbly, almost invisibly. I wanted to know who would love me without the shine of money. I wanted to know if the people around me valued me for who I am, for my heart, for my years of wisdom, or only for what I could give them. So, I moved into a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood. I gave my son, Caleb, a smaller property, comfortable, but without luxuries. I never told him how much my estate was actually worth. I never showed him the bank accounts. I never allowed him to enter the main mansion, which I kept in secret, visiting it only at night with the complicity of Arthur, my loyal estate manager, and Margaret, my lifelong friend. My son Caleb was always a good kid, hardworking, honest, affectionate. But when he met Jessica, something changed. She came into his life like a gust of ambition, wrapped in perfect smiles and sweet words that hid poison. From the first moment, Jessica evaluated me. She measured me. She weighed me on her mental scale and decided I was worth nothing. To her, I was just the poor mother-in-law, the old woman with no resources, the one who lived in a modest little house and wore simple clothes. She treated me with that subtle contempt that some people master perfectly. Fake smiles in public, hurtful comments when no one else was listening, looks that clearly said, "You don't belong in my world," and I stayed silent. I watched. I took mental notes of every gesture, every word, every moment she made me feel small. For 2 years, I lived that role. The invisible mother-in-law, the one who arrived at family gatherings with a homemade dessert while Jessica bragged about her purchases at high-end boutiques. The one who listened in silence while she talked about her rich friends, her trips, her plans to turn my son into someone important. Caleb worked tirelessly, 12 hours a day, trying to satisfy his wife's increasingly high expectations. And I watched him exhaust himself, burn out, lose that light in his eyes he always had as a child. But I never intervened, because I needed to know how far things would go. I needed the truth to reveal itself on its own, without my interference. The annual charity gala at the mansion was the most anticipated event of the year. Every November, high society gathered there for a noble cause, always different. Children with cancer, animal shelters, college scholarships. This year, the cause was a children's hospital. Tickets cost $5,000 a person. Only special guests received access. And Jessica had managed, through her contacts and her persistence, to get 2 invitations for herself and Caleb. She was euphoric. For weeks, she spoke of nothing else. She bought an incredibly expensive champagne-colored dress. Italian shoes, jewelry borrowed from a friend. She had her hair done at the most exclusive salon. She hired an esthetician. She lost 10 pounds. This was her big night, her chance to shine among the elite she had always admired from afar. 1 week before the party, Caleb called me. "Mom, Jessica got an extra invitation for you. We'd like you to come with us." His voice sounded genuine, warm. My son really wanted me there. I felt an immense tenderness for him, and also a pang of sadness because I knew Jessica had nothing to do with that invitation. It was Caleb who got it, pressuring his wife, insisting that his mother be included. I accepted, of course, and I told him I had a dress saved, a special one I had bought years ago and never worn. I had left it at his house during my last visit, hanging in the guest room closet. It was an elegant pearl-colored dress with beaded details from a renowned designer. Not ostentatious, but beautiful. Appropriate for a woman of my age who wanted to look dignified, respectable, present. That morning, the day of the party, I went to Caleb's house early to pick up my dress. It was 10 in the morning. Caleb was in his office, working as always. I rang the doorbell. No one answered. I tried the key my son had given me years ago for emergencies. I walked in calling out, "Jessica? Caleb?" Silence. I thought maybe they had gone out. I walked up the stairs toward the guest room where I had left my dress. And then I heard something, a metallic sound. Scissors. The unmistakable sound of scissors cutting fabric. My heart raced. I walked faster. I opened the bedroom door, and there she was. Jessica was standing in front of the bed, with my dress laid out on the mattress, and in her hands she held silver scissors, large ones, sharp, and she was cutting my dress into pieces with slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial movements. Every snip sounded like a sentence. First, she cut the sleeves, then the neckline. Then she started on the skirt, making long strips that fell onto the bed like dead snakes. The beaded details detached and rolled across the floor, shining under the morning light like little glass tears. I stood paralyzed in the doorframe, unable to move a single muscle. Not out of fear, not out of surprise, because deep down I always knew she was capable of cruelty, but out of the sheer magnitude of her hate. Because this wasn't an impulsive act. This was premeditated, calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. When I finally managed to speak, my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "What are you doing?" Jessica turned around slowly, without jumping, without guilt, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive, as if she wanted me to see her. On her face was a smile, not a nervous or ashamed smile, a satisfied, victorious smile, full of a dark pleasure that made her eyes shine with something I can only describe as pure malice. "I am doing what should have been done a long time ago," she said with a soft, almost sweet voice that contrasted brutally with the violence of her actions. "I am putting things in their place." She took another snip, and another, and another. Every cut was a stab, directed not at the dress, but at me, at my dignity, at my presence, at my existence in her perfect world. "That dress is mine," I managed to say, although my throat was tight and the words came out with difficulty. "It was yours," she corrected me, emphasizing the past tense with surgical cruelty. "Now, it's trash, just like your place in this family." She walked toward me, still holding the scissors, and for a moment I thought she was going to use them on me. But no, she was smarter than that. She knew physical violence leaves marks, evidence, consequences. Emotional violence, on the other hand, is invisible. It hurts more and lasts longer. She stopped inches from my face. I could smell her expensive perfume, see the flawless makeup she was already wearing, even though the party was hours away. "You are not going to that party," she said with a terrifying calm. "You don't have the money to be there. You weren't really invited. It was Caleb who insisted, but I know the truth. You don't belong to that world. You are a poor, simple, ordinary woman. And I am not going to allow you to embarrass me in front of important people." The words hit me like stones. Each one of them had been chosen to hurt, to humiliate, to destroy. "That party is my night," she continued, backing away from me and returning to the remains of the dress. "It is the night I am finally going to be seen as what I am, a woman of class, of style, of importance, and you, with your cheap dresses and your small-town manners are only going to ruin everything. So I am doing you a favor. Now you have no choice but to stay in your little house where you belong." She gathered all the pieces of fabric from the dress, bundled them in her arms like a bouquet of withered flowers, and threw them at my feet. "You can take this if you want. Maybe you'll find something useful to do with the rags." And then she turned around and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, surrounded by the remains of what had been a beautiful dress, staring at the destruction she had caused with such coldness. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time stopped in that silent room, where only my ragged breathing and the distant sound of Jessica humming a song downstairs could be heard. I bent down slowly and picked up the pieces of fabric. They were cold in my hands, still soft, despite having been mutilated. Every fragment was a reminder of her hate, but also of something deeper, her fear, because people don't destroy those they consider insignificant. They only destroy those they perceive as threats. And in that moment, kneeling on the floor of that room, surrounded by pieces of my dress, I understood something fundamental. Jessica feared me. She didn't know exactly why, but something in her sensed that I wasn't what I appeared to be, and that terrified her. I left that house in silence, with the pieces of fabric in a plastic bag. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront Jessica, who was in the kitchen drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. I simply left. I closed the door carefully, walked to the bus stop, and sat on a bench under the November sun, waiting for the transport that would take me back to my small house. During the entire ride, I clutched the bag against my chest, feeling the beaded fragments pressing through the plastic. And while the bus moved through familiar streets, while anonymous faces and gray buildings passed by, something inside me began to change. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was something older, more powerful. It was dignity waking up after a long sleep. When I arrived at my house, I went in and locked the door. I sat on the living room floor, on the old rug I had bought at a flea market. I emptied the bag in front of me. The pieces of fabric spilled out like autumn leaves. I took each fragment between my fingers, examining it, feeling the texture, remembering the day I had bought that dress at an exclusive boutique in Paris, when my husband was still alive and we traveled the world without a care. I had paid $4,000 for it, not because I needed to spend that amount, but because it was beautiful and made me feel beautiful. And now it was destroyed, reduced to nothing, just as Jessica had tried to reduce me. But here is the difference between a dress and a person. A dress, once cut, cannot be restored. A person, however, can rise, can rebuild themselves, can decide that the humiliation ends now. I sat on that floor for almost an hour, in absolute silence, feeling something inside me harden, strengthen, transform. And then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in 2 years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I grabbed my phone. I dialed Margaret's number, my lifelong friend, the only person besides Arthur who knew my secret. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret," I said, with a voice that sounded strangely calm, almost cold. "I need your help. Today is the day. Today this charade ends." Margaret arrived at my house in less than 30 minutes. She knocked on the door with that special code we'd had for years. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 more knocks. I opened it, and there she was, with her silver hair perfectly styled, her green eyes full of worry and determination. We had known each other since college. We had gone through marriages, children, losses, and joys together. She was the sister life gave me, when blood gave me none. She entered and hugged me without saying a word. She just held me there, in the small foyer of my modest house, while I finally allowed 1 or 2 silent tears to roll down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, because after 2 years of carrying the weight of the lie, of the voluntary humiliation, of the constant testing, I was finally going to let it all go. "Tell me what happened," Margaret said when we sat on the sofa. I showed her the pieces of the dress. I told her every detail: Jessica's smile, the scissors, the cruel words, the way she had told me I didn't belong in that world. Margaret listened in silence, but I saw her jaw tighten, her hands balling into fists on her lap. When I finished speaking, she stared at me for several seconds. Then, she said something I will never forget. Eleanor, for 2 years I have watched you humiliate yourself voluntarily. I have watched you accept scorn, endure veiled insults, allow that woman to treat you like you were less than nothing. And I accepted it because you said it was necessary, that you wanted to test people's character. But this is no longer a test. This is abuse. And if you don't stop this now, if you don't reclaim your dignity this very day, you are going to lose yourself forever. She was right. Completely. I had submerged myself so deep in the role of the poor, insignificant mother-in-law that I had almost forgotten who I really was. Eleanor Sandoval, widow of Fernandez, owner of properties valued at over $15 million, an educated, traveled, cultured woman, the widow of a brilliant man who taught me that true power doesn't need to be displayed, but neither should it be trampled on. You're right, I told Margaret. And as I said it, I felt my spine straighten, my shoulders pull back, my chin lift. Today ends everything. Today, they are going to know who I really am. Margaret smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It was a war smile. Then let's get you ready, she said, standing up. Because if you're going to reveal the truth, you're going to do it the right way, with class, with elegance, with the impact you deserve. I called Arthur. He had been my husband's butler for 20 years, and after his death, became the estate manager and my most loyal confidant. When I told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard his voice, normally so controlled and professional, tremble slightly with indignation. Mrs. Eleanor, that woman has crossed the line. It is time for her to face the consequences of her arrogance. I explained my plan. I needed him to prepare the mansion for my triumphant arrival. I needed him to make sure everything was perfect. And I needed him, at the precise moment, to make the announcement that would change everything. It will be an honor, Arthur said with a solemnity that made me smile despite everything. I will prepare everything as you deserve, as it always should have been. Margaret and I drove in her car to the mansion. It was noon. The party would start at 7 in the evening. We had enough time to get me ready, but also to think, to plan every detail. As we drove through the city streets, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and calm. Nervousness, because what I was about to do would have irreversible consequences. Calm because, for the first time in 2 years, I was going to be completely honest. When we arrived at the mansion, Arthur was waiting for us at the main entrance. The property looked spectacular. The gardens were impeccably manicured, with seasonal flowers creating explosions of orange, yellow, and violet. The white columns shone under the sun. The bay windows reflected the blue sky like giant mirrors. It was a postcard of elegance and power, and it was mine. We entered through the main door, that carved wood door that had been imported from Spain 40 years ago. My heels echoed on the marble foyer, a sound I hadn't heard in months. The last time I had been here was at night, entering silently through the back door to review some documents with Arthur. But now it was different. Now I entered as the owner, as I always should have. Arthur gave a slight bow. Ma'am, the house is ready. The vendors for the party have been working all morning. The decoration is almost complete, and I have ensured that no one knows of your presence here until the moment you decide. I thanked him with a hug, something that took him by surprise because we generally maintained a more formal relationship. But today was different. Today, I needed him to know how much I valued his loyalty. Margaret and I went up the main staircase toward my bedroom, the master suite that occupied the entire east wing of the second floor. I opened the doors, and the smell of fresh lavender greeted me. Arthur had kept everything spotless. The bed was made with white Egyptian linen sheets. The ivory silk curtains moved gently with the breeze coming through the open window. My vanity was exactly as I had left it, my perfumes, my jewelry in their velvet boxes, my framed photographs. One of the photos showed my husband and me on our wedding day, 52 years ago. Him with his dark suit and that shy smile that always melted my heart. Me with my white dress and a bouquet of roses, so young, so full of dreams. I took the photograph in my hands and whispered to him, "Today I am going to do what you would have wanted. I am going to defend myself. I am going to be strong." Margaret opened my closet, and when the doors slid back, We both stood, staring at the collection of dresses, suits, coats, and shoes I had accumulated over decades of travel and events. There were pieces from famous designers, gowns I had worn at galas, at state dinners when my husband was invited for his work, at important family celebrations. Everything was covered with protective bags, perfectly organized by color and occasion. "We're going to find something perfect," Margaret said with determination. She began reviewing every piece, pulling them out one by one, evaluating them with a critical eye. She discarded several too formal, too dark, doesn't send the right message, and then she found it. She pulled it from the back of the closet, covered in a special silk bag. When she removed it, we both gasped. It was a deep emerald green dress, with an impeccable cut that accentuated the figure without being vulgar. 3/4 sleeves with French lace, and an elegant length that hit just below the knee. The fabric was pure silk, with a subtle sheen that captured the light magically. It had belonged to an exclusive collection from an Italian designer my husband gifted me for our 40th anniversary. I had never worn it because it always seemed too beautiful, too special. I had saved it waiting for the perfect occasion. And this was that occasion. "This is it," I said, touching the fabric with reverence. "This is the dress." Margaret nodded with a smile. "It's perfect. It conveys power, elegance, maturity. When you walk in wearing this, no one will be able to look away." I bathed in my marble tub with aromatic salts and essential oils. I let the hot water relax every tense muscle, let the steam cleanse not just my skin, but my spirit too. While I was submerged there, with my eyes closed, I thought about everything I had endured for 2 years. Jessica's contemptuous looks, the passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, my house, my lifestyle, the times she excluded me from conversations or family events, the times she made my son feel he had to choose between her and me. And I thought about Caleb too, my son, my only son, the boy I raised with so much love, and who was now married to a woman who despised me. How much did he know? How much had he seen? Or had he been so blinded by love, or by convenience, that he preferred not to see? When I came out of the bath wrapped in a white silk robe, Margaret had already prepared everything on my bed. The emerald dress was laid out carefully, along with accessories she had selected from my jewelry box. A necklace of natural pearls my husband gave me on our trip to Japan, discreet diamond stud earrings, a thin white gold bracelet, ivory pumps with a medium heel, elegant but comfortable. Everything had been chosen with surgical precision. Every piece transmitted a message: class, sophistication, quiet power. "Now sit," Margaret ordered, pointing to the chair in front of my vanity. "We're going to work on your hair and makeup." I obeyed, feeling like a bride getting ready for her wedding, or perhaps like a queen preparing to reclaim her throne. Margaret worked on my hair with expert hands. She brushed it until it shone like polished silver, then gathered it into an elegant, low bun, leaving some soft strands framing my face. It wasn't a youthful hairstyle. It didn't try to make me look younger than my 73 years. It was a hairstyle that celebrated my age, that turned it into a symbol of wisdom and dignity. The makeup was equally careful. Light foundation that evened my skin tone without covering it completely. A touch of blush on the cheeks to give me life. Earth-toned eyeshadow that made the hazel color of my eyes pop. Soft eyeliner, mascara on the lashes, and an antique rose lipstick that completed the look without being dramatic. When she finished, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked like another person, but because I had recovered something I had lost in these 2 years. My presence, that indefinable quality that makes someone walk into a room and everyone turns to look. I put on the dress with Margaret's help. The silk slid over my skin like cool water. The fit was perfect, as if it had been made specifically for my body at this moment in my life. It hugged me in the right places, disguised what needed to be disguised, highlighted what deserved to be highlighted. When I saw my full body reflection in the mirror, I felt tears threatening to appear again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of recognition. Because the woman looking back at me from the mirror was me, the real me, the one who had been hidden, asleep, waiting for the right moment to wake up. "You are radiant," Margaret whispered behind me, her own voice breaking with emotion. "You are absolutely radiant." It was 5 in the afternoon. The party would start in 2 hours. The first guests would arrive around 6:30, the elegant time to arrive when one wants to be seen making an entrance, but without seeming too eager. Arthur came up to inform me that everything was ready. The main halls were decorated with spectacular floral arrangements. The tables were set with linen tablecloths and fine porcelain china. The catering team was preparing appetizers in the kitchen. The servers had already arrived, dressed in their impeccable uniforms. The orchestra was tuning their instruments in the ballroom. Everything functioned like a perfectly oiled machine. And in the center of all that preparation, no one knew the real hostess was upstairs, waiting for her moment. I explained the exact plan to Arthur. I wouldn't arrive at the beginning. I would let Jessica and Caleb arrive first. Let them enjoy their moment of glory. Let them parade through the halls, believing they were at the pinnacle of their social success. I would wait until the majority of the guests had arrived, until the event was in full swing, and then I would make my entrance. But it wouldn't be a common entrance. Arthur, who traditionally stayed in the background during these events, would make an announcement that would stop the party cold and change everything. "Are you sure, Mrs. Eleanor?" Arthur asked with his usual professionalism, though I could detect a glimmer of anticipated satisfaction in his eyes. "Completely sure?" I responded with a firmness that surprised even myself. "It is time for the truth to come to light." Margaret and I went down to my husband's study, a room that was always his refuge and that I had kept exactly as he left it. Walls lined with books, a mahogany desk, leather armchairs, the smell of pipe tobacco that still impregnated the curtains despite the years. We sat there, in the heavy silence of that room full of memories, and waited. We listened to the distant sounds of preparation, voices of workers, music being tested, the clinking of glasses and plates. And then, around 6:40, we heard the first cars arriving, doors closing, voices rising in greetings, laughter. The party was beginning. Arthur entered the study discreetly around 7:15. "Your son and daughter-in-law have just arrived," he informed with his neutral voice. "Missus. Jessica is wearing a champagne-colored dress with sequins. She has entered as if she were the main hostess of the event. She is introducing herself to all the important guests, taking photographs, bragging about how she got the invitations." He paused, and then added with the slightest touch of disdain, "It is quite evident that she is enjoying the attention immensely." I nodded. I expected exactly that. Jessica finally had what she had always wanted: access to the elite, an opportunity to shine, to be seen as someone important, and she was exploiting every second of that opportunity, not knowing everything was about to crumble. "How many guests have arrived?" I asked. "Approximately 120 of the 150 expected," Arthur responded, including Ambassador Martinez, the Delgado family who donated $100,000 to the Children's Hospital, the director of the Art Museum, 3 congressmen, and several important business people of the city. Perfect. A substantial audience. Enough witnesses for what was about to happen to have the necessary impact. "Give her another 15 minutes, I told him. "I want almost everyone to be here. And I want Jessica to have had enough time to feel completely comfortable, completely sure that this is her night." Arthur nodded with a small smile. "It will be as you order, ma'am." During those final 15 minutes, Margaret took my hand. We didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She knew what this meant to me. She knew it wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't a desire to humiliate for the simple pleasure of doing it. It was justice. It was dignity. It was the act of a woman who had been pushed too far and finally said, "Enough." I thought about all the times Jessica had made me feel invisible, insignificant, less than nothing. I thought about how she had destroyed my dress this morning with that satisfied smile. I thought about how she had tried to erase me from my own son's life. And I felt that what I was about to do was not only right, but necessary. At 7:30, Arthur returned. "It is time, Mrs. Eleanor." I stood up. Margaret fixed a last strand of my hair. She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle on my dress. "You are perfect," she told me. "Now go out there and show them who you really are." We left the study. We walked down the hallway that led to the main foyer. I could hear the orchestra music clearly now, the animated conversations, the laughter, the sound of a successful party in full swing. My heart beat fast, but not from fear. From anticipation? From power? From the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. Arthur walked ahead of me toward the main ballroom. I waited in the foyer, hidden behind the columns, where I could see without being seen. I observed the elegant crowd, all dressed in their best finery, holding glasses of champagne, chatting in small groups. And there, in the center of it all, was Jessica, radiant, triumphant, with her champagne dress shining under the crystal chandeliers. She was talking to a group of older women, probably wives of businessmen, gesturing animatedly, clearly delighted to be the center of attention. Caleb was by her side, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, smiling politely, but with that tension in his shoulders I knew so well. My son was never good at social events. He always preferred the quiet of work, the honesty of numbers and contracts. This was Jessica's world, not his. Then Arthur headed to the center of the room. He made a discreet signal to the orchestra director, who stopped the music in the middle of a piece. The silence was abrupt. All conversations ceased. All heads turned toward Arthur, surprised by the interruption. He stood tall with his impeccable posture, his immaculate black suit, and spoke with a clear, strong voice that filled the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, pardon the interruption, but I have a very important announcement to make. The silence in the room became absolute. 120 people looked at Arthur with curiosity, some with glasses halfway to their lips, others with expressions of confusion. Jessica looked especially bewildered. I saw her frown slightly, as if wondering why the butler was interrupting her moment. Caleb simply looked on with that neutral expression he adopted when he didn't fully understand a situation. Arthur continued, his voice resonating in every corner of the room. For many years, this mansion has been the stage for important events, for charitable celebrations, for gatherings of high society. But tonight is special for a reason that many of you do not know. He paused dramatically, letting the tension grow. Tonight, for the first time in 2 years, the true owner of this property is present among us. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw several people look at each other, confused. Someone whispered, "What is he talking about?" Jessica took a step forward, with a nervous but still confident smile. "Arthur, I think there is a misunderstanding," she began with that sweet, fake voice she used when she wanted to seem charming. But Arthur ignored her completely. He kept his gaze fixed toward the foyer, toward where I was waiting, and then he pronounced the words that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, with great honor and respect, I present to you Mrs. Eleanor Sandoval, widow of Fernandez, the true, legitimate, and sole owner of this mansion and these grounds for 40 years. The true owner of this mansion has just arrived." That was my moment. I took a step forward, stepping out of the shadows of the foyer. The light of the lamps illuminated me completely. My emerald dress, my discreet but evidently valuable jewelry, my perfectly styled hair, my straight and dignified posture. I walked slowly toward the main ballroom, with measured steps, without rushing, letting every person in that room have time to see me, to register my presence, to understand what was happening. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if time itself had stopped. No one moved, no one breathed. They just looked at me, with eyes wider and wider, with mouths slightly agape, processing the information Arthur had just provided. And then I heard the scream. A scream that came from the bottom of his soul, one I remembered in the days that followed. It was the voice of my son, Caleb, full of shock, disbelief, absolute confusion. "This mansion is hers. It always was." His face had paled until it became almost transparent. His eyes, the same honey-colored eyes he inherited from his father, looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost, as if his entire reality had fractured into 1,000 pieces. Beside him, Jessica was completely motionless. Her face, normally so animated and expressive, had frozen in a mask of horror. The champagne color of her dress now looked sickly yellow under the lights. Her hands trembled visibly, making the glass she held clink. But it was her look that impacted me the most. It was a look of absolute comprehension. She had just understood, in a single devastating instant, that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. I continued walking toward the center of the room, where Arthur awaited me with a slight bow. When I reached his side, he extended his hand, offering me support, and I took it with gratitude. Then I turned to face the crowd. I recognized many faces. Ambassador Martinez, who had dined in this very house several times when my husband was alive. Mrs. Delgado, with whom I had worked on charity committees years ago. The museum director, who had asked me for donations in the past. All of them looked at me with a mix of delayed recognition and shame. Because they knew me, or they had known me. But in these 2 years, when they saw me in my simple clothes, in my role as the modest mother-in-law, they hadn't recognized me. Or perhaps they had simply chosen not to see me. "Good evening, everyone," I said with a voice that came out surprisingly clear and firm. "Many of you know me. Some knew me years ago when my husband and I were regular hosts of events in this house. Others perhaps have seen me in the last 2 years, but didn't recognize me because I was dressed differently, lived differently, acted differently." I paused, letting my words resonate. 2 years ago, after the death of my beloved husband, I made a decision that many would consider strange. I decided to live simply and modestly, without revealing my true financial situation. I wanted to know something important. I wanted to know who would love me, who would respect me, who would treat me with dignity, without the shine of money as motivation. I could see uncomfortable faces in the crowd. Some people lowered their gaze, ashamed. Others nodded slightly, beginning to understand. I continued. "For 2 years, I observed. I learned. I saw the true character of people when they thought I had nothing to offer them. And I must say that some surprised me pleasantly." I looked toward Margaret, who was standing near the entrance, with tears in her eyes and a proud smile. Others, however, showed me a cruelty I never imagined possible. And then, for the first time since I entered, I looked directly at Jessica. She took a step back involuntarily, as if my eyes had physically pushed her. "This morning," I continued with a calm voice, but loaded with emotional weight, "my daughter-in-law destroyed a dress I had bought to wear tonight. She cut it into pieces with scissors, deliberately, while looking me in the eye. She told me I didn't have the money to be at this party. She told me I wasn't really invited. She told me I didn't belong in this world, that I was a poor, simple, ordinary woman. She told me my presence would embarrass her in front of important people." I heard audible gasps in the crowd. Several women brought their hands to their chests, scandalized. A man murmured, "My God!" Jessica began to shake her head with small and frantic movements, as if she could make my words disappear simply by rejecting them. "But here is the truth she did not know," I said, raising my voice slightly. "This mansion, with its 50,000 square feet, its 7 acres of gardens, its halls, its rooms, its history, belongs to me. The deed is in my name since 1985, when my husband bought it as an anniversary gift. Besides this property, I own 2 other buildings in the city, diverse investments, and bank accounts that, although I don't need to share specific details, allow me to live very comfortably for the rest of my life and leave a considerable legacy to my son." The silence now was different. It wasn't confusion. It was absolute awe. I chose to live modestly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove to myself and to test those around me. Caleb finally found his voice. He took a step toward me, his face devastated, his eyes full of unshed tears. "Mom," he whispered, though in the absolute silence of the room his voice was heard clearly. "Mom, I didn't know. I never knew." His voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were struggling financially? I tried to help you. I tried to give you money several times and you always rejected it." And then his face changed, as if a horrible realization had just hit him. He turned toward Jessica, with an expression I had never seen on him before. It was a mix of betrayal, fury, and deep pain. "Did you know she was faking poverty? Did you destroy her dress this morning? Did you really say all those things to her?" Jessica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her face had gone from pale to a greenish tone. Sweat was beginning to form on her forehead, ruining the perfect makeup she had applied. Her hands trembled so violently that the glass she held finally fell, smashing against the marble floor with a sound that made several people jump. The champagne spilled over the floor like golden blood and shards of glass scattered around her feet. But she didn't even look down. She just looked at me, with eyes full of a terror that would have been satisfying if it weren't so pathetic. And then, suddenly, from somewhere deep inside her, she found words. "It's not what it looks like," she said with a sharp, almost hysterical voice. "I didn't. I was just trying to protect Caleb. She always acted so strange, so mysterious. I thought." "You thought what?" interrupted a voice from the crowd. It was an older woman, elegantly dressed, with completely white hair gathered in a bun. I recognized her. It was Mrs. Beatrice Sterling, one of the most respected matriarchs of local society, known for her brutal honesty and unshakable sense of justice. She walked toward the center, looking at Jessica with the kind of disdain only someone of her position and age can achieve without seeming cruel. "Did you think you could humiliate an older woman just because you believed she didn't have the means to defend herself? Did you think destroying her belongings and excluding her was acceptable simply because she appeared to be of a lower class?" Mrs. Sterling turned toward me with genuine respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor, I deeply regret that you had to endure such treatment." Other voices began to rise from the crowd. A man in a dark suit, whom I recognized as Elias Montgomery, an important businessman and friend of my late husband, stepped forward. "Eleanor, I knew your husband for 20 years. We did business together, dined in this very house dozens of times. You are a woman of honor and always have been. If you decided to live modestly, I am sure you had your reasons. And no one, absolutely no one, had the right to treat you with contempt." He looked at Jessica with an expression of evident disgust. The true character of a person is revealed in how they treat those they perceive as inferior. And what we just heard tonight is revealing. Several attendees nodded with approval, murmuring words of agreement. A young woman, probably Jessica's age, who was close to her in the social circle, stepped forward with an uncomfortable expression. "Jessica, you always talked bad about your mother-in-law at our gatherings. You said she was a burden, that she had no style, that she didn't understand our world. You even laughed when you said you wouldn't invite her to important events because she embarrassed you." The woman lowered her gaze, clearly regretting having been a silent accomplice. "I never said anything because I thought they were just normal complaints. But now I see it was much more than that. It was calculated cruelty." Jessica turned toward the woman with wild eyes, as if she had been stabbed in the back by an ally. Caleb was completely shattered. I watched him collapse emotionally in real time. His shoulders slumped, his face crumpled, and the tears he had been holding back finally began to roll down his cheeks. He turned to me with an expression of pain so deep my mother's heart almost broke, despite everything. "Mom, I am so sorry. I didn't know Jessica treated you like that. I worked so many hours, always absent, always trying to earn more money because I thought you needed it, that we needed it. And while I was away, His voice broke completely. He couldn't finish the sentence. He simply covered his face with his hands and sobbed like I hadn't seen him do since he was a small child. Jessica tried to approach him. "Caleb, my love, please let me explain. I only wanted the best for us. I thought if your mother wasn't so present, you could focus on your career, on our future." Her voice sounded desperate now, stripped of all the confidence and arrogance that normally characterized her. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted us to be successful, to belong to this world. Is that wrong?" But when she reached her hand toward Caleb, he pulled away, as if her touch burned. "Don't touch me," he said with a low, dangerous voice I had never heard him use. "Don't you dare touch me right now." That was when I decided to speak again. Not with rage, not with a desire to humiliate more than necessary, but with the simple and direct truth that needed to be said. "Jessica, for 2 years I watched you treat other people with the same contempt with which you treated me. I saw how you looked at servers in restaurants as if they were invisible. I saw how you spoke to the domestic staff hired for events with condescension and lack of respect. I saw how you judged people by their clothes, by their jobs, by their zip codes. And I always knew your problem wasn't with me specifically. Your problem is that you measure people's worth by their bank account, by their social status, by their ability to give you access to certain circles." I paused, letting my words penetrate. "But here is what you don't understand. True luxury, true class, has nothing to do with how much money you have. It has to do with how you treat others. It has to do with kindness, with empathy, with humility, and those are things money cannot buy. I looked around the room at all the faces watching me with absolute attention. My husband taught me that. He came from poverty, built his fortune from scratch, and never forgot where he came from. He never treated anyone poorly, and when he died, leaving me all this, I decided to honor his memory by living with the same values he had. Ambassador Martinez, a distinguished man in his 60s, approached with a serious expression. "Mrs. Eleanor, you and your husband were always an example of integrity in this community. I remember when he anonymously donated $500,000 to build the pediatric wing of General Hospital. He never wanted public recognition. He simply wanted to help." He turned to the crowd. "This family has contributed more to charitable causes than many of the people in this room. But they always did it in silence, without seeking applause or recognition. That is true generosity." His gaze landed on Jessica briefly, with an expression that clearly communicated his disapproval. Jessica began to tremble visibly. Her entire body shook, as if she were cold, even though the room was perfectly climate-controlled. She tried to speak several times, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, but no coherent words came out. Finally, she managed to articulate, "I didn't mean to. I just..." And then, to everyone's surprise, she began to cry. Not delicate, photogenic tears. It was ugly, desperate crying, the kind that comes when someone finally understands the magnitude of what they have done. Her makeup began to run, leaving black lines down her cheeks. Her body bent slightly, as if the weight of the shame were physical. But I didn't feel satisfaction seeing her like that. I felt something more complex, a mix of sadness for the wasted potential and determination not to allow her behavior to continue without consequences. I approached her, not too close, maintaining a respectful distance. When I spoke, my voice was firm but not cruel. "Jessica, you had so many opportunities to choose kindness, so many opportunities to treat me with basic respect, not because you knew I had money, but simply because I am a human being, because I am your husband's mother, because I am a 73-year-old woman who deserves basic dignity." She looked at me through her tears, with red, swollen eyes. "But every time, you chose cruelty. Every time, you chose contempt. And today, when you destroyed my dress, you crossed a line that cannot be undone." Caleb approached me finally, falling to his knees in front of me in a gesture that made several people in the crowd gasp. "Mom, please forgive me. I should have seen what was happening. I should have been more present. I should have protected your dignity. I am your son, and I failed at the one thing that really mattered, making sure you were treated with the love and respect you deserve." His hands trembled as he reached toward me, not touching me yet, waiting for permission. "I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I'm just asking that eventually, someday, you give me the chance to prove to you that I can be better." I looked at my son kneeling in front of me, his face streaked with tears, his gala suit wrinkled by the humble posture he had adopted, and I felt my heart splitting in two opposite directions. One part of me wanted to hug him immediately, console him, tell him everything would be okay, like I had done when he was a child and fell off his bike or got bad grades. But the other part, the part that had grown strong during these 2 years of silent observation, knew that this moment was too important to be resolved with a simple hug. I extended my hand and touched his hair gently, that maternal gesture I had done 1,000 times throughout his life. "Caleb, get up," I told him with a soft but firm voice. "Get up, my son." He obeyed slowly, standing up but keeping his head low, unable to look me directly in the eyes. "You didn't know what was happening," I continued. "And yes, maybe you could have been more present. Maybe you could have paid more attention. But the responsibility for Jessica's actions lies with her, not with you." I looked briefly toward where Jessica stood, trembling, her face destroyed by crying and shame. "However, what I do need you to understand is this. From now on, things cannot continue as they were. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will always love you because you are my son. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And reconciliation requires real change, not just pretty words said in a moment of crisis." Caleb finally looked me in the eyes, and I saw something in them that gave me hope, genuine understanding. It wasn't the confused look of someone who still doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. It was the clear look of someone who finally sees the complete truth and accepts the weight of that truth. "I understand, Mom," he said with a hoarse voice. "And I promise you I am going to do whatever is necessary to earn your trust again. I don't know how long it will take, but I am willing to work on it for the rest of my life if necessary." His words sounded sincere, devoid of the manipulative desperation that sometimes accompanies apologies when people just want the pain to end quickly. These were words from someone who really understood he had lost something precious and was willing to do the hard work to get it back. I turned toward Jessica. She had stayed in the same spot, arms wrapped around her own body as if trying to hold herself together physically. When our eyes met, I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Recognition. Not just that she had been discovered, but that she had been deeply wrong. "Jessica," I said her name, without rage, without poison, only with the neutrality of one stating facts. "I didn't need you to love me. Relationships between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law are sometimes complicated, and I understand that. But I needed you to respect me. I needed you to treat me with the basic dignity every human being deserves, and you constantly chose not to." She opened her mouth, perhaps to defend herself, perhaps to offer some elaborate excuse, but before she could speak, I raised my hand gently, stopping her. "I don't want to hear explanations now. I don't want to hear justifications about your difficult childhood, or your insecurities, or your desire to belong to certain social circles. All those might be reasons why you acted the way you did, but they are not excuses. Because at the end of the day, each of us is responsible for how we treat others, regardless of our own internal struggles." My voice remained calm, without rising, without breaking. "What you did this morning, destroying my dress while looking me in the eye, was not an impulsive act. It was calculated. It was cruel. And it was designed specifically to hurt and humiliate me." Mrs. Sterling, who had remained nearby listening attentively, intervened again with her authoritative voice. "In my 78 years of life, I have seen many types of behavior in society. I have seen greed. I have seen ambition. I have seen people doing terrible things for money or status. But what concerns me most is the lack of basic empathy." She looked at Jessica directly. "Young lady, you have a decision to make now. Can you continue being the person you were until today, focused only on appearances and social climbing, regardless of whom you hurt in the process? Or can you use this devastating moment as an opportunity to transform into someone better? But that decision is yours and no one else's." Elias Montgomery added his voice, addressing the crowd generally but clearly referring to Jessica. "The true measure of a person is not in how they behave when everything is going well, when they have everything they want, when they are surrounded by admiration. The true measure is in how they treat those who can offer them nothing in return, in how they respect the elderly, the service staff, those they perceive as lower status." His eyes rested briefly on Jessica before returning to me. Eleanor demonstrated extraordinary wisdom by voluntarily stripping herself of the trappings of privilege to discover the truth about the people in her life. Not many would have the courage to do that. An older woman from the Delgado family, the renowned philanthropist who had donated $100,000 to the Children's Hospital that night, approached and took my hand in hers. "Mrs. Eleanor, I deeply admire what you have done. Not only tonight by exposing the truth, but during the last 2 years by living with intentional humility. That requires a strength of character few people possess." She squeezed my hand with genuine affection. "And I want you to know you have my absolute respect and my friendship, if you accept it." Other people began to approach then, forming a sort of protective circle around me, offering words of support, of admiration, of apology for not having recognized me sooner. While this was happening, Jessica remained increasingly isolated. The people who moments before had been chatting with her, admiring her, taking photos with her, now avoided her as if her shame were contagious. It is a cruel reality of society that the same people who lift you up when they perceive you as successful abandon you instantly when you fall. I saw her looking around, searching for a friendly face, an ally, but finding only expressions of disapproval, or worse, indifference. It was like watching someone drowning in public while everyone watched from the shore, no one willing to extend a hand. And it was in that moment, seeing her completely alone in the middle of that elegant crowd, that something in me changed. It wasn't pity exactly. It was the recognition that complete humiliation served no constructive purpose. Justice had been served. The truth had been exposed. The consequences of her actions were evident. But continuing to crush her would not make me a better person. It would only make me someone who uses her power to inflict pain. And that was exactly what she had done to me. I approached her again, this time closer. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes, full of fear about what else I might say to destroy her. "Jessica," I said in a voice low enough that only she, Caleb, and perhaps a few very close people could hear. "I am not going to continue exposing your mistakes in front of this audience. Everyone already knows what they need to know, but I will tell you this, and I hope you really hear it. You have an opportunity now to decide what kind of person you want to be in the future. You can learn from this. You can grow. You can transform, or you can become bitter, blame others, and follow the same destructive path. The choice is yours." I paused, ensuring she was looking directly at me. "But if you choose the path of growth, if you really work on becoming a better person, eventually we might find a way to coexist civilly. Not for you, but for my son, who loves you despite everything." Jessica looked at me as if I had just offered her a life raft when she was about to drown. Her lips trembled, trying to form words, but only jagged sobs came out. Finally, with a barely audible voice, broken by crying and shame, she managed to say, I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve anything from you after everything I did." Her hands moved nervously, twisting the fabric of her champagne dress, now stained with tears and sweat. "You are right about everything you said. I treated you horribly. I judged you without really knowing you. And the worst is that I did it because I was scared." Her voice broke even more, admitting that I was scared that you were better than me, that Caleb loved you more than me, that I was never enough. Hearing that confession, so raw and vulnerable, affected me in a way I didn't expect, because beneath all the cruelty, beneath all the arrogance and contempt, was a deeply insecure woman who had built walls of malice to protect herself from her own fears. That didn't justify her actions, but it explained them in a more human way. "Fear can make us do terrible things," I responded calmly, "but acknowledging that fear is the first step to overcoming it. The question now is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to let fear continue controlling you, or are you going to face it and grow beyond it?" Jessica looked at me with eyes that seemed to really see for the first time, not an insignificant mother-in-law, but a complete person with wisdom earned through 7 decades of life. "I want to be better," she whispered, and something in the way she said it made me believe that maybe, just maybe, she was sincere. "I don't know how, but I want to try. I want Caleb to be proud of me, not ashamed. I want to be able to look in the mirror without feeling disgust for the person I see." She took a shaky breath. "And I want, someday, if possible, to be able to apologize to you in a way that means something more than just words spoken in panic." I saw fresh tears rolling down her cheeks, but these were different. They weren't tears of public shame or of having been caught. They were tears of genuine repentance, the kind that comes when someone finally sees themselves with brutal clarity. Caleb, who had been listening to everything in silence, approached Jessica, but didn't touch her yet. There was a distance between them now, a space created by betrayal and disillusionment that couldn't be closed with a simple hug. "Jessica," he said with a tired voice, as if he had aged 10 years in a single night, "I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't know if our marriage can survive this. I don't know if I can forgive how you treated my mother, the woman who gave me life, who raised me alone after my father died, who sacrificed so much for me." His voice hardened slightly. "But what I do know is that if there is any chance of us staying together, you need to do deep work on yourself. Real therapy, real reflection, genuine change, no acting or empty promises." The crowd had begun to disperse slightly, giving us some relative privacy, although many were still watching from a respectful distance. The orchestra, at some point during all this drama, had begun playing soft music again, creating a strangely civilized soundtrack for such a raw confrontation. Arthur approached discreetly at my side and murmured, "Mrs. Eleanor, Do you wish for the party to continue as planned, or do you prefer we dismiss the guests? I considered the question. This night had been organized to raise funds for the Children's Hospital, an important cause that shouldn't be completely eclipsed by personal drama. The party continues, I responded firmly. Tonight has a bigger purpose than my personal situation. The children at the hospital need those funds. Arthur nodded with approval and walked away to instruct the orchestra and the staff. I turned toward the crowd that still lingered nearby and raised my voice enough to be heard clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret that tonight you have witnessed such intimate family matters. It was not my intention to turn this charity event into a spectacle. The purpose of tonight remains supporting the Children's Hospital, and I hope everyone can continue enjoying the evening with that goal in mind. There were murmurs of approval, and some people began to applaud softly, not for the drama, but for the reminder of why they were really there. Margaret approached and took my arm affectionately. You are incredible, she whispered in my ear. You just exposed one of the biggest betrayals of your life, and you still have the grace to think of others. I smiled wearily. My husband always said that true character shows not when we are hurt, but in how we respond to that hurt. I could have destroyed Jessica completely tonight. I could have humiliated her to the point of no return. But what would I gain from that? Temporary satisfaction? No, I don't want to be the person who causes unnecessary pain, even to those who have hurt me. Margaret hugged me tightly, and I felt her own tears wetting my shoulder. The guests began to move through the room again, although the atmosphere had changed irreversibly. Conversations were more serious, more reflective. I saw several older people speaking with younger ones, probably sharing their own stories about the importance of respect and humility. Ambassador Martinez approached with a glass of red wine and offered it to me. I think this will help, he said with a kind smile. I accepted the glass with gratitude and took a sip. The wine was excellent, rich and smooth, exactly what I needed in that moment. Eleanor, the ambassador continued, what we witnessed tonight was extraordinary. Not just the exposure of the truth, but your handling of it. Many people in your position would have used their power to completely crush the one who wronged them. But you chose a different path. True power isn't in how much damage you can inflict, I responded thoughtfully, but in how much mercy you can show when you have every reason not to. I looked around the room, at this mansion that had been my home for 40 years, that had seen so many celebrations, so many moments of joy, and now this moment of painful truth. This house has witnessed a lot of life. My husband and I raised our son here. We celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, professional successes. We also cried here when he received his cancer diagnosis. This house holds my entire adult life. I paused, feeling the weight of the memories, and I don't want the last memories I have of it to be of revenge or cruelty. Elias joined our conversation, with his elegant wife on his arm. Your husband would be very proud of you tonight, Eleanor. He always valued integrity above all else. His wife nodded enthusiastically. And your social experiment, so to speak, was brilliant, albeit painful. You really revealed the true character of the people around you. Other guests began to approach, forming a small circle around me. It was strange, after 2 years of being invisible, to suddenly be the center of positive attention. But it also felt right, as if I were reclaiming not only my identity but my place in this community. A young woman, probably about 30, approached shyly. Mrs. Eleanor, I don't know you personally, but what you did tonight was very brave. I also have a mother-in-law who has been looked down upon by my family, and I have never defended her as I should. You have made me realize that I need to change that. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you for reminding me that dignity has nothing to do with money. I smiled at her warmly and took her hand. It is never too late to do the right thing. Go to your mother-in-law, ask for forgiveness, and build the relationship she deserves to have with you. The night continued with a transformed atmosphere. What had begun as an elegant and superficial social event had become something much deeper and meaningful. Conversations were no longer about luxury vacations or material acquisitions, but about values, about how we treat others, about what really matters in life. I saw Jessica and Caleb sitting in a corner of the room, separated but together, talking in low voices. He gestured occasionally, clearly expressing his pain and confusion. She listened with her head down, nodding, wiping away tears constantly. It was a conversation they needed to have, and I was glad to give them that space without my intimidating presence. Arthur approached again, near 10 o'clock at night, with an elegant envelope. "Mrs. Eleanor, the event organizers asked me to give you this." I opened the envelope and found a handwritten note. It was from the charity committee, thanking me not only for allowing the event to be held on my property, but for the anonymous donation my husband and I had apparently made for years to these causes. The note mentioned that, thanks to the accumulated contributions, the Children's Hospital would finally have the oncology equipment it desperately needed. I felt my heart fill with a warmth that had been absent for so long. This was what really mattered. Not the galas, not the jewelry, not the social status, but the ability to make a real difference in the lives of people who are suffering. Margaret approached with 2 glasses of champagne and handed me one. "A toast," she proposed with a smile. "What are we toasting to?" I asked curiously. "To the truth, to dignity, to women who refuse to be invisible, and to second chances, both the ones we give and the ones we receive." We clinked our glasses gently, and the sound of the crystal rang out like a small bell of victory. We drank in silence, looking around the room where life continued, where people were dancing now, where music filled the spaces that moments before had been charged with tension. "What are you going to do now?" Margaret asked after a moment. "Will you move back here to the mansion, or will you continue in your small house?" It was a question I had been asking myself. "I think," I said slowly, letting the words form as I spoke, "that I will find a balance. This mansion is my home. It always has been. But my little house also became a refuge, a place where I learned important things about myself. I don't want to completely give up either of the two." I looked at Margaret with a smile. "Maybe I'll split my time. Some days here, other days there. Maintaining contact with both versions of myself, the matriarch who built a legacy and the simple woman who finds beauty in modesty." Margaret nodded with approval. "That sounds perfect. Sounds exactly like something you would do." Around 11 at night, Caleb approached me. His face still showed signs of the night's emotional devastation, but there was something else in his eyes now. Determination. "Mom, could we talk in private?" I nodded and followed him toward the library, that quiet room full of old books where his father used to read him stories when he was a child. We closed the door behind us, leaving the noise of the party outside. Caleb sat in one of the leather armchairs, and I took the one opposite him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, mother and son, navigating the unknown territory of this new reality between us. "I don't know where to start," he said finally with a hoarse voice. "I've been married to Jessica for 5 years. During all that time, I was so obsessed with working, with making money, with building a life I thought would make us happy, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration he had inherited from his father. "Jessica treated you poorly and I didn't see it. Or maybe I saw it and chose to ignore it because it was easier. Because facing it would mean admitting that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was." His eyes filled with tears again. "I'm a coward, Mom, a damn coward." "You are not a coward," I responded firmly. "You are human. People often don't see what they don't want to see, especially when it comes to those we love. It's not cowardice, it's denial, and we all experience it at some point." I leaned forward, getting closer to him. "What matters now isn't what you didn't see before, but what you choose to do now that your eyes are open." Caleb nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Jessica and I talked. She admitted things I never thought she would admit. Her insecurity, her jealousy, her need to feel superior to others, to not feel inferior. He paused. "And she also admitted she needs professional help. Real therapy, not just a couple of sessions to pretend she's doing something." "That is a good first step," I acknowledged. "But Caleb, you need to understand something important. Real change takes time. It doesn't happen overnight because someone was exposed publicly and felt ashamed. True change requires constant work, day after day, even when no one is watching." I looked him directly in the eyes. "And you also have to decide if you are willing to stay during that process. If you are willing to rebuild your marriage from scratch, with eyes wide open this time. Because if you aren't willing, if there is too much damage, that is also okay. You don't have to sacrifice your happiness or your peace of mind for misplaced loyalty." Caleb considered my words carefully. Honestly, I don't know yet. Part of me wants to try, because I do love Jessica despite everything. I see the potential of the person she could be if she worked on herself. But another part of me is so hurt, so disappointed, that I don't know if I can get past this. His voice broke slightly. And what hurts me most is that, while I was working tirelessly, thinking I was building our future, she was torturing my mother. The most important woman in my life was suffering, and I wasn't there to protect her. Tears finally fell freely down his face. How do I forgive myself for that? I got up from my chair and kneeled in front of him, taking his hands in mine. Caleb, look at me. I waited until his teary eyes found mine. I forgive you. Completely. Without reservations. It wasn't you who hurt me. And although you could have been more present, you are not responsible for another adult's actions. I squeezed his hands tightly. Now you need to do the hardest work, forgiving yourself. Because carrying that guilt won't help you, won't help me, and definitely won't help your marriage if you decide to continue with it. I hugged him then, like I had done 1,000 times when he was a child, and I felt his body shake with liberating sobs. After several minutes, Caleb calmed down. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and managed a small smile. Thank you, Mom, for everything, for being who you are, for teaching me, even now, how to handle difficult situations with grace. He stood up, and I did the same. I'm going to take Jessica home. We have a lot to talk about. And tomorrow I'm going to start looking for therapists, both for her and for me, because I think we both need help navigating this. I hugged him once more. That is a wise decision. And remember, no matter what happens with your marriage, you will always be my son, and I will always be here for you. We returned to the ballroom where the party was coming to an end. Most of the guests had already left, leaving only the closest ones. Jessica was standing near the exit, waiting for Caleb, looking small and fragile in her wrinkled dress. When our eyes met, she approached slowly. Mrs. Eleanor, she said with a trembling voice, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but if someday, in the future, you could find a space in your heart to forgive me, I will work every day to deserve it. She didn't wait for my answer. She simply gave a small bow, a gesture of respect she had never shown before, and left with Caleb. Margaret and I were the last ones to stay, along with Arthur, walking through the empty halls. It was an extraordinary night, Margaret said. Yes, I agreed, feeling strangely at peace. And now something new begins. I don't know exactly what, but I feel like tonight closed a chapter and opened another. I looked at Arthur. Thank you for your loyalty all these years, for keeping my secret and for making that announcement tonight. He smiled. It was an honor, Mrs. Eleanor, an honor. That night, when I was finally alone in my room, I sat in front of the mirror and looked at myself properly for the first time in a long time. I saw a 73-year-old woman who had survived losses, betrayals, and tests. But I also saw strength, wisdom, and unshakable dignity. And I knew that, no matter what came next, I would be okay. Because I had learned the most important lesson. Your worth doesn't come from what you own, but from who you are when no one is watching. And that is a wealth that no one can ever take away from you.